You're doing all the things. Your calendar is stacked full. It's color-coded. You're checking off all the boxes. But at the end of the week, you're still wondering why you haven't made any progress. In fact, busyness is the newest form of procrastination. And not only that, it's actually avoidance in disguise.
Hey, welcome back to the Pursuit of Happy Well podcast. We get to talk about all these things that produce success in our life and try to find all the myths of things that keep us busy.
Yeah. And I think this is really going to speak to our culture because we have a very, very busy, like, have you ever had somebody say, when we ask, hey, how are you doing? What does everybody say? Good, busy.
Usually it's just like, so busy.
So
Just
busy.
busy.
I want to meet the person who's not busy. I mean, I think I assumed that, well, even your parents in retirement, like they're busy. And I'm like,
Can you imagine how you would feel if someone was just like, I have all the time in the world. Someone is like, how are you doing? I'm doing great. I've got all the time in the world.
I'm not busy. I don't even know what that'd be like. I don't think I would even know how to navigate that conversation. But I think this is such a great conversation because it's going to hit home a little bit for me. It's going to speak to a little bit of how I'm wired. Maybe it'll speak to how you are wired because we all are busy. The question is, are we productive? Are we actually making meaningful progress in our life? And the whole goal of this show, The Pursuit of Happy Well, is not just busy for the sake of busy or producing for the sake of producing or chasing metrics that other people have handed you. It's like, are you building a life that's meaningful to you? Or are you just going to wake up one day and be like, I was so freaking busy, but for what? Yeah. For what? What do I have to show for that? And in fact, there was this crazy stat by the Harvard Business Review that the average worker spends 41% of their time on tasks that don't contribute to long-term goals. 41%
as a business owner
of their time.
Really don't like that stat.
That's it. Everybody's doing a time audit again.
Yeah. And as someone who works, I also fully understand and see that.
Yeah.
In my own schedule, my own day to day.
I like that it was very specific and it doesn't contribute to long-term goals.
Correct.
Because I think we can be a society that's very much what's now, what's in front of me, as you sometimes call it, the urgency of the now.
Yeah.
What's causing me stress right now? And we become very reactive to our life, like just flying by the seat of our pants, going through the motion. And we have to ask, is it meaningful? And I kind of said this earlier. Well, I said it kind of at the start of this, was that busyness is the new form of procrastination, which just feels wild to say, but I know it's true. And it's just avoidance in disguise. We're going to unpack that a little bit more. But this idea of, busyness being a form of avoidance, what are we avoiding? What are we drowning out with all that noise of busy? Because busy is noisy.
Yeah. Well, some of it comes back to, you talk about you said this a little bit, but the tyranny of the urgent.
Yeah.
Right. We have this quadrant of things that need to be done, and sometimes they are important. Sometimes they're not important. Sometimes they're urgent. Sometimes they're not urgent. And I think the goal is to not live in the urgent category where everything is like needing to happen now, right now in this moment. But that's often how things get done. Not in the sense of like getting done completed, but that's often how we work and operate.
Oh, for me, for sure. Like, I know it has really taken a lot of work for me to be somebody who doesn't rely on feeling urgency in order to work. I remember when I was, I'm an anxious person. And I remember telling my therapist at one point, I was really nervous about starting anxiety meds because I was afraid that it would, oh my gosh, this is so, I don't know. I feel very vulnerable sharing this, but it's very real.
Yeah.
I remember thinking like, I'm going to lose my edge because my anxiety gives me my edge. I work when I am anxious. And I was afraid that it would numb that part of me and I wouldn't know how to work without my anxiety.
Man, that's a podcast in itself.
Should we just like hard pivot this podcast?
No. But I think it's going to come
Yeah.
up because I think there's some pieces, even as I think about today's conversation, there's some things that how I operated. But we'll move forward.
Okay.
So defining that problem basically in the sense of procrastination and all those types of things, the idea between motion versus progress.
Mm.
And what is the difference between those two things? What does it mean to be in motion versus what does it mean to be in progress?
Mm. Well, and if you look at people, we're all in motion. Like we're going from, look at our life right now. We're going from kids' soccer practice, skiing on the weekends, school to and from here and there. We're just on the go. Everything in our culture is on the go. So we are people in motion, but are we people making progress?
Yeah. There's a stat that says only 10%, this comes from Gallup, only 10% of people say that they're in control. They feel like they're in control of how they spend their time daily.
That's freaking depressing. My son would hear this podcast. He's like, "Mom, you just said frickin'. You can't say that. You can't say that."
But that's a hard truth and reality. I think many of us can get to a place in our life where we feel like we're out of control of our schedule.
Yes.
Either it's that time has been taken by work or sports, or I remember about 2 or 3 years ago, I had a moment in my life where I just felt like the way I described it to you is I really felt like I was just like a buoy floating in the ocean, just at the whim of the current, not really in control of where I was going, just kind of like just floating around.
I really feel like it's important to give some context to that for our listeners, because a lot of people that want to build a meaningful life, a good portion of them will choose entrepreneurship because they want to be in charge of their own time. Like, I think this stat of only 10% of people feel like they are in control of how they spend their time. A lot of them think, okay, in order for me to get control back, I'm going to be in control of work and I'm going to be an entrepreneur, be my own boss. Okay. But you also have to know that how you feeling that we were business owners in the time.
Yeah.
I was running, like we were, quote, having time freedom. We were our own boss. So I would say, don't think that entrepreneurship suddenly puts you back in control of your own time and that suddenly this doesn't become a problem anymore. In fact, I think it removes maybe the middleman that we like to blame. Like, oh, my job takes all my time. Well, what happens when you're the person taking all your time and not being meaningful with it? So you said you were like a buoy floating in the ocean.
It's this idea. I think I said this to you as we were kind of planning our podcast today, was this idea that I kind of felt like in a lot of ways, I was living my life on accident in the sense that I was just moseying through the day.
Yeah.
And I was in motion.
Yeah.
We were in motion. We had young kids. We're going to sports. We are going to, at that time, I think we had a swim and all those kind of things as well, all these extracurricular activities.
Yep.
And we're skiing, all these things were happening. And so from the outside looking in, like we're a family as the modern American family might look. I mean, going to the things, going to the plays at school, going to the concerts, whatever. But it was all motion, not a lot of progress.
How did that feel for you?
Terrible.
Yeah. Like, in what way? Like, I think our listeners, it'd be like, they might be like, well, how do I know that I'm caught in that?
Well, this is part of why I think this is where this podcast comes from. This idea of the pursuit of happy well does not happen on accident.
Amen.
It happens intentionally. But what we're trying to expose is intentionality matters, but also what you're chasing matters, right? And so when we think about at that season in our life, we were chasing success. We were chasing growing the business. We were chasing the dollar. We were chasing time freedom. We were chasing business owners.
Like, we're chasing kids.
we were chasing kids. But none of that was, all of that was motion. And it was all dictated by an exterior narrative that I think the world gives us. These are the things you need to be happy, and these are the things you need to do to be successful, but they didn't align. And so in my life, it created a lot of motion, but it didn't land. It wasn't landing in the depths of my soul. And because of that, there wasn't a lot of growth in me or progress in me in what I was really desiring at a soul level.
I don't think you were even in the energy of chasing.
Yeah,
I think you
well,
were in the energy of existing.
I think that's the life on accident kind of idea.
Like in default. Like
Yeah.
I'm chasing, or I'm not chasing, I'm just responding to the demands of the day and of the season put on me. And at the
Yeah.
time it was,
Yeah.
So
this idea of motion, I was in motion. So I was
yeah.
quote unquote productive, but I would say not effective. So here's what I mean by that. So productive in the sense that there were certain things that had to get done, right? We had
Yeah.
a business. We had to make sure that certain things were filed, paid, whatever. And
Yeah.
so I had a to-do list. I was checking those things off.
Yep.
And so I was productive, but I wouldn't say I was effective. And so productive meaning I was checking things off. Effective meaning that I was making meaningful progress. And I think there's two things that were not happening. One, I didn't know, I had no goal. I had no progress to.
Yeah.
Right. And then two, it wasn't meaningful because it wasn't aligning.
Yeah. Well, yeah, nothing. I don't even think you were in a place where you were like, what am I aligning my life to? I think that was a sad, sick season,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which we talked about sad, sick in our first couple episodes. So if you're not familiar with that, you can go look back, but that's 100% correct. Right.
Yeah.
We thought we were happy and well. We thought we were in the happy, well category. But as I reflect after, walking through that season,
Yeah.
it's like, no, there was things that weren't aligning with me.
Yeah. I think there's like cultural metrics of happy well, and we had them, we were hitting them, like income, lifestyle,
Time freedom. 2.5 kids on a picket fence.
Yeah. 2 dogs,
Yeah.
This is our life, yada, yada, yada. Like the cultural metrics of happy well were there, but the internal metrics of what aligned for you wasn't there.
Right.
I was, speaking of busy being a form of avoidance, I was truly busy in my business that I wasn't even slowing down to take stock.
Yeah.
And ask like, hey, is this still meaningful to me? Am I moving forward in a meaningful way? Or am I is the business dictating every next move I make because of how quickly things are moving? So I was under the tyranny of the urgency of what was happening in the business. And then I think you were kind of just strapped along for the ride.
Yep. Yeah. So it's this idea of like, if you ever felt like you've been on a treadmill trying to climb a mountain, but never getting closer.
Yeah. Like I'm moving, but I'm not getting anywhere. And this is why am I sweating so much babe, I think every episode we have mentioned a treadmill. What is going on? What is going on?
So
people are going to think like we're treadmill junkies. We're not.
Yeah, we actually are starting a treadmill business. We're just planting.
Surprise! That was the reveal.
We're just planting. Also happens to be that we're recording this on April Fool's Day. So.
Oh gosh, that's so funny.
But that is hilarious that we keep talking about a trip. I think it's because our generation, our culture relates to this idea of a hamster wheel treadmill.
Yeah,
it just seems to land because we are so busy. And part of this is a shame story in the sense of like, if I'm not producing, I don't matter. If I'm not busying my life, then I'm lazy. And it's like, whoa. There's a lot to unpack right there.
I was going to say, do you think there's maybe some generational handoff in that? Like how the boomers raised us of like, work hard, put your head down, like productive, like grind it out, put in your time, pay your dues. I feel like the millennials have really kind of pivoted and created a different story for themselves, but I still think we carry the internal narrative of move, go.
I don't know.
I
think part of that's true. I think also it's just partly what's put in if we're going to go from a biblical standpoint, this is the idea of Sabbath as a resistance that Brueggemann talks about. in the time of the Egyptians, and it's like produce more bricks. And so this idea of like, if we're not producing bricks, we have no meaning. That's a whole nother segue, but I think that is a narrative that is ingrained in us. I don't think it's just because of boomers. I think that is a human condition where we just think like, if we're not productive, we have no meaning, we don't matter, we're lazy. All those pieces come into that.
Well, this is going to go into that. I think that's where the busyness is an avoidance, because if I'm not busy, then I have to answer that question.
Ooh.
If I'm not busy, then I have to answer, well, then what value do I have?
What value do I have?
What do I bring? Do I matter? Or it's just like, what's going to come up when I turn the volume down?
Yeah.
What am I actually going to hear in the quiet that maybe I'm not ready to hear yet? And that feels pretty deep. I think even John Mark Comer said, as the form of like, this idea of Sabbath as resistance, or just rest as resistance, even like, maybe our listener isn't, biblically, background or anything like that. And that's fine. It's more so, okay, so how can this still relate to you? It's like, it can be your push against, the cultural, consumeristic, capitalistic, like, and hey, we're business owners. Go out and be productive and contribute to the economy. But the idea of like this consumeristic, heavy society, you can resist against that of like, buy more, do more. So it's like, actually, I'm pushing against the cultural norms when I choose rest.
Yeah.
Which is a form, I like it. It's like a form of resistance. Like,
yeah,
stand with me.
Yeah.
So let's talk about like the illusion of progress, because I think we can mistake movement for actually getting stuff done. Right? Are you laughing? Are you about to call me out? Are you going to call me out?
I might call you out. So this is one of my favorite things that we talk about in our business.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So this illusion of progress. And we just read a book.
The One Thing?
Yeah, The One Thing. I forget the author's name. But he talks about, what is the one thing that matters, right?
Yeah.
For your best use of your time in your role. But what we talk about in our business a lot is Kristen loves Canva.
How dare you, Scott Boss?
Loves Canva. She is not our graphic designer, although I will say she is very good at it.
I'm very good.
But she is not our graphic designer, and I would say is not the best use of her time to be in Canva. And so oftentimes...
I'm going to argue for myself when you're done, but continue.
Oftentimes, we will be in the Slack thread talking about things that need to be completed, and all of a sudden I'll get a drop. It'll be empty. It'll be quiet. No response. And then I'll get like 12 messages in a row, and it's like 10 different mock-ups of some thumbnail that she's been working on for the last, I don't know, 4 hours.
How dare you? Okay. That was for our last business, Scott.
Yeah.
But true. Okay. But no. Okay.
So from the entrepreneur standpoint, this idea of like spending hours designing
and the thing
the logo.
that doesn't actually move the needle forward in your business. 100%. I will also say, I'm going to play devil's advocate there just for myself, because you called me out and I have to explain myself now. I am a visual. I'm over, I'm the copy, the content. I'm in the creative department. We know this.
Yes.
And so for me, sometimes when I sit down to do a project, I actually have to see it in my head first. And Christina knows this about me, our COO that's been with us forever. She knows that it usually has to start with a visual for me to figure out, okay, how does that visual make me feel? What's the brand direction here? Where are we going? I will say, so for me, sometimes like when I was creating a new 3-day or something that I did in our last business, I would start with like the graphics for it, because I was like, oh, this is how, because I always think of how I want people to feel. Anyways, I know that's a tangent. Either way, I love my Canva. Step off.
So the example here, though, the idea of being in motion is the entrepreneur that tweaks the logo, tweaks the bio, the sales page, tweaks the colors, back and forth, but never actually gets an offer
Yeah,
out
they're
into the
not
world.
actually out there making the offers and bringing in the things that actually create the revenue.
Correct.
I will say this, I had a moment like that. I think it was earlier this week. I know, yes, it was earlier. No, it was last week. And I was working a lot. I was getting a lot of stuff done. And I had a moment toward the end of the week where I went up to you and I voiced how I was feeling. I was like, I feel very overwhelmed in this moment. But I had the self-awareness to understand what was going on. And I said, I think the reason why I feel this way is because I'm completing a little bit of projects everywhere instead of focusing all my task on finishing this one project. And because I'm a little bit everywhere and I'm not seeing a completed project yet, it makes me feel like I'm not getting anything done.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I noticed I was having a lot of internal anxiety, overwhelm, conflict, when I knew, okay, well, what's the solution here? The solution is to focus on the one thing I know that makes the most meaningful progress. And I will not have a side quest until this project gets done. And all the ADHD listeners were like, yeah.
Side quest.
Listen, video games is the best thing in the world for me because I love my side quests.
Side quests.
But I got to not do it in business. But okay, so
Yeah.
that's the example for the entrepreneur. We can also talk about like the example of like maybe the stay-at-home parent, the caregiver. And I think that you've been in that role. So the motion of like, okay, cleaning the house, dropping the kids off, getting the meals together, having everything done. But by the way, your health is the most meaningful thing to give your children.
Yeah. Say it again.
Your health is the most meaningful thing to give your children because
100%.
when you're tired, burnt out, not caring for yourself, your kids, they are the receivers of that.
Yeah.
But oftentimes we're so busy going through the motions of, being a provider parent, like, hey, here, I'm going to provide your physical needs, your needs to get you from point A to point B, but like, hey, their emotional needs are just as important. And you cannot meet a child's emotional needs unless you've been meeting your own first.
Yeah.
You just can't. And so this idea of like, this parent, the caregiver has such a jam-packed calendar, but they haven't had 30 minutes of time for themselves to read their book, focus on their health, focus on their vision, to take care of themselves. Right. Yeah. And so that's a way of like motion, but are you making progress? Meaning, are you caring for yourself? Are you going back to like, wait, hold on. And this feels very counterintuitive for caregivers. I know, especially for women, it's just like it feels very weird putting their needs first. It feels very selfish. There's maybe some conditioning there. It's like, oh, I'm wrong to have my own wants and needs and desires. Or, maybe they feel the reason I feel value by what I do. Some people feel valued by being needed. Right. Like if I'm not needed, then I have no value.
Yeah.
And that's a story we tell ourselves too. The last one would be like a corporate high achiever, right? That like another example of what is motion versus actually progress. And it's like, we see this. I mean, I've consulted a lot of high level people, and they are caught in, responding to the Slack channel, the inbox, like, responding to constantly putting out fires is, I think, the term. It's like, I'm always putting out fires. And there's a quote that's like, meetings are where work goes to die. They're caught up in meetings and not understanding where they have no clear KPIs of like key performance indicators where there's like, hey, here's where we're actually measuring progress. So those are that's progress versus motion, right?
Yeah. Well, and those are all examples of motion, right?
Yeah.
Especially I've been in those meetings where it's like, man, how many times have you been in a meeting where like that could have been an email?
Oh my gosh.
Like you could have just sent in an email and we all would be on the same page. Now, I will tell you, one of the things we talk about in the pursuit of happy well is that community matters. Now, forced community, I never liked when I worked and had to do these businesses where it's like, okay, now we're going to, business meetings, now we're going to do an icebreaker. It's like, oh man, I always hated those. But there is importance about being shoulder to shoulder and seeing someone on the other side of the table or getting in a room and sharing a lunch, right?
Yeah.
But if your whole day is all meetings, how are you ever going to get anything done? And many people that are in that story end up bringing work home,
Yeah.
and they're working beyond the hours
Because the meetings chewed up their whole day.
because
So
the
they weren't
meetings,
able to get things done.
100%.
Yeah. There's this quote. I don't know where it's from, but I'm not going to take the credit for it. But this is why this idea of being busy versus being effective and productive, right? Busyness. Oh, this is so painful for me to say and so true. Busyness. Busyness?
Myth, myth.
Busyness. Busyness soothes anxiety, but effectiveness requires clarity and discomfort. Dang. I can say that is 100% true. And I think, again, it's just like when we're not busy, we have to answer, I think, hard questions. We have to feel hard feelings. I think for me, it's just that I think I also saw this other quote. It's like, it's not that I love productivity. I'm just really afraid of what happens when I stand still.
Mm.
And I can relate to that. It's just like I'm afraid of what might come up for me when I stand still or when I rest. And you've seen me do this where I have to like come up to you and say, I need you to tell me it's okay. Like I'll be in rest and I have to come up to you and be like, I need you to tell me I'm okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and when it comes to busyness, one of the things I think happens a lot in work environments is that clearing the inbox takes a lot of our time. And so if you've ever read any productivity hack books or anything like that, one of the things I talk about is putting that in a time slot during your day, either at the very beginning for a short window or at the very end, and you're only going to check it for like 30 minutes, because otherwise we check it constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And every time we hit that checkbox to delete something or open an email or respond, we get a dopamine hit. One, that makes us feel like we're productive.
Yeah.
In motion, not effective, right?
Yeah.
And also I think in a lot of ways, if we're really honest, being in a zone of effectiveness can put us in a place on the edge of our growth zone.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to demand from us some of our best work. And what that also means is sometimes it also could demand from us to be pretty vulnerable.
Mm.
And so what I mean by that is some of our most effective work is work that's going to expose us, whether we are in the right seat or not in the right seat.
Say more, because someone might be like, seat, what do you mean? I know what that means, but.
So in the sense of like you've been hired to do a job, this idea, this is a common phrase. I don't like it, but this idea of like you fake it till you make it.
Yeah, I hate that.
Well, if you just stay busy, you can fake it for a really long time.
Oh, dang, babe.
But if all of a sudden you need to be productive and effective, it's pretty hard to fake that.
Oh. Mic drop. That's pretty, yikes. That's hitting hard with that idea of like anybody can pretend busy, but you can't pretend effective.
Yeah.
Okay,
Did I just take us on a whole nother tangent?
Yeah, you kind of did. No, but I mean, it's really good.
And that's not a shame. I don't mean that from out of shame, but here's the other piece. Because in those moments, oh gosh, okay, we're totally throwing this out now. Because I think in those moments, we feel as though if we've been hired for a role, we need to know how to do it 100%.
Yeah.
And we will not be vulnerable in areas in a role that we've been hired and expected to be competent in. We won't be vulnerable to say that, hey, I'm struggling with this. And we won't reach out. And so what we do is we just stay busy. We just stay busy. Instead of pausing and being like, man, I'm really struggling with this. I need to reach out to my team because I've been given a team to work with to support and tackle this together, because we're afraid that we might expose our inadequacy and therefore lose our job.
Man, that's so good. I kind of want to add to this for somebody that's maybe not in corporate, but they're in this like busy versus productive, or why busy, or choosing to be effective, what that can bring up for you. I think what it can bring up for you is the necessity of setting boundaries and realizing like, I can't keep saying yes to those things.
Yeah.
Or people pleasing everyone around me at the cost of my health, the things that matter to me. And I'm not talking about like someone's going to hear that and be like, oh my gosh, that sounds so selfish. No, 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 no. I'm talking about prioritizing your mental health, your well-being, your emotional health, all these things that help you be an effective person,
Yeah.
that help you do meaningful things in the world. And I think in order for us to be effective in what we are doing, it means we're going to have to actually say no to the things that add to noise or distract us from effectiveness. So that might mean turning down the invitation. That might mean telling someone, I'm sorry, I do not have the bandwidth to do that at this time. Come to me another time. It might mean risking disappointing someone because we're not busying ourselves, pleasing them. We're not busying ourselves, living our lives in a way that they think makes sense. Because I
Yeah.
think when we live our life according to our values, our metrics, we become effective and we do meaningful things. I think there are some people that were maybe reaping the benefits of our busyness that no longer get to benefit when we become effective.
But say that more on that last line.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So let's take in somebody who, let's take in a caregiver. They're busy. They're caring for everybody at the cost of their health,
Possibly. Yeah.
their hobbies, their joy, things that fill their cup, right? So they're busy, maybe meeting everyone else's needs. And then when they decide to step into, okay, I'm going to actually start making meaningful progress. I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to recognize my own limitations. I'm going to ask for help with these things, these tasks. Well, if somebody has been the benefactor of that person busying themselves, waiting on them hand and foot, and that person suddenly has boundaries and says, no, I can't. I don't have capacity at this time. I would like your help with this instead because I'm working on these things. Well, suddenly that person, they're losing out on the person that's choosing to go from busyness, which was for them was a form of people pleasing and self-abandonment, to move into meaningful progress and realizing I need to actually prioritize these things. And so there might be some, we'll call it like relational dynamics there. There might be some resistance to you becoming the person that moves from busy to effective and productive.
Yeah, there's a quote in Essentialism that stuck with me that Greg wrote. This idea that if you don't prioritize your life, someone else will.
Oh man, based on what I was just saying, that like gave me goosebumps.
Yeah, yeah, and it kind of goes back to like you remember in grade school when your parents used to say like, "Hey, you don't pick your friends; they're gonna pick you." Right, and so it's like
I never heard that.
You never heard that?
No, I heard the birds of a feather flock together.
Okay, I mean I heard that one too, but it's the idea of like if you don't prioritize your time, someone else will.
Well, I think that, you know what? I think this happens to a lot of people that become parents. Like the kids run the show. Like and man, I get that. They can, and I remember like that newborn stage, like my life living by 2-hour increments of just like, oh, he's going to be due to feed then, and all that. And there is some of that, but I mean, like, this is where I think some people that don't know it, they don't realize that they're living their life by default or somebody else, other things are dictating their time. I think maybe that's when empty nesters might really struggle when the kids go off to college and they're like, well, who's telling me what's dictating my time now? Yeah. Or when the teenagers start to grow up and have their own schedules, they're like, what do I do now?
Yeah.
There's
a quote here you put in here in our notes, and it says that overcommitment can be a stress response, a way to avoid stillness, which feels threatening.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? What does that mean in the sense of like, in terms of motion versus
progress?
Progress?
If I'm busy, I'm probably too busy to feel sit still, reflect, ask questions. Like, I think an overbooked calendar is a form of numbing and running.
So maybe one way, because we also talk about like self-awareness in one of our past podcasts, is the idea that self-awareness isn't um, common knowledge in the sense of like you have to work and expose that. So it could be looking at a
Oh, yeah.
calendar be a way to understand if you might be in this category of
100%.
motion versus productive.
I would say if you have every moment in your day booked, no, I want to be careful with that. I want to say, what if you were to have an empty calendar, what would come up for you?
Yeah.
Would you experience the urge to fill it right away?
Yeah.
Because some of you might, you might have like 8 kids and you're like, no, Kristen, like,
You don't understand.
you don't understand. Right. No,
Hear
I
that.
would just say, like, are you creating, well, we talk about margin. It's like, do you have resistance to creating space to think, to feel,
You have the
to
unscheduled.
reflect for unscheduled?
The idea of scheduling the unscheduled time.
Yeah. And I think there is a real, like, this idea of it being a stress response, 100%, because my therapist said this once. I feel like the show could also be like My Therapist Says, because I reference her a lot. Treadmills and My Therapist.
Yeah.
But she said, Kristen, she was talking about it in the lens of addiction. And she said, an alcoholic doesn't know why they drink until they decide to stop drinking. That's when it's exposed. That's when the reason why they drink is exposed.
That's when the coping mechanism is exposed.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
It's like, it's when they can no longer reach for the thing that they finally uncover the reason why they were drinking or doing the thing to begin with.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you are a busy, like, and this is me, hyper productive, like, that is my stress response. I move into productivity and busyness and those things because stillness can feel very triggering for me, because then I'm left with my thoughts, and then what am I producing in the world, and then I don't matter, all those things. But
Right.
The idea is what comes up for me if I remove the thing.
Yeah.
So what comes up for you if I was to see, 3 hours of unscheduled time? What comes up for me? Be like, great, then there's something to explore here.
Okay, so we talked about this idea of motion versus, effectiveness, effective progress. What's a way that we could, a little bit of how we can expose it? You just talked about, sort of, and there's probably other ways to do this too, but there's one example. What are maybe some questions or something that we could ask ourselves, and how to respond to this, or how to weed things out, or...
Yeah, I have them right here in our show notes.
Oh, great.
Okay, so I like this one. First, asking yourself, you could do it on a Sunday, a Monday, but what result am I actually trying to create this week? I think if you could just answer that one question, that could be a game changer in and of itself. Because I think some people don't even know.
Well, that's what
They're just like, what result do I want this week? And then someone might be like, result, I'm just trying to live.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's what I meant by living my life on accident. Was there was no goal, there was no result I was chasing or trying to create or accomplish.
Right. So I would say if you ask this question, what result am I trying to create this week? And you come up with nothing, then we don't move forward. We now have to sit with well, if I could, what would I want to create?
Yeah.
What would I want to? And the idea is, when you ask yourself that, you have to suspend your current level of disbelief about that.
Yeah.
About your ability to have it, do it, accomplish it. I think so many people won't even let themselves want or come up with ideas of things to create because they've just conditioned themselves to believe this is it.
Don't even see that as an option.
They don't even see it as an option. And that's a big thing for people.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, he said, there was a season where I had to learn to flex my want muscle. I was like, say more. He's like, well, I didn't realize how often I wasn't letting myself desire more for myself. And I thought it was wrong. I should be content. This is how life is. So he had all of these stories in his mind of like, this is how it's supposed to be. And this is your lot in life versus what if I am in fact allowed to want more and desire more for my life? Not from a place of this like consumerist, I want to numb these things and I'm chasing my worth outside myself, but like, what does it actually look like to have new goals? Another vision for my life. So the question was, what result am I trying to create? What am I actually trying to create for this week?
Yeah. And then second question, which I really like this one a lot, because one thing we've talked about is, what is something I'm actively avoiding right now?
Yeah.
Very, very, very,
Yeah.
I think it'd be revealing. But the second question is this idea of what task feels most uncomfortable and most meaningful.
Yeah, I would often say sometimes our most meaningful tasks are the most uncomfortable.
100%. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's this one project that I'm still chipping away at for new business. And I'm just like, God, if I just get it done. And I'm like 75% there. And I'm just sitting and looking at the last 25%.
Is that because you're still doing stuff on Canva?
How dare you? No, it is not. No, it is not. Scott.
But that goes back to what we talked about earlier in the sense of, being effective often requires putting yourself in an uncomfortable position.
Yeah.
Right?
And it requires a high level of focus and denying yourself distractions in the accomplishing of it.
Okay. And the last question is a zinger.
I
Go for
hate
it.
this. Of course you're making me ask it.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Am I avoiding decisions by staying busy? I am not somebody that runs away from decisions. I can be, in some ways, I think out of the two of us, I'm the very, very fast decision maker. You're more slow, watch 20 YouTubes, 5 spreadsheets. Hey, if you're going to roast me, I'm going to roast you here. Hey, it's fair game here. But like, yeah, you're like, look, if there could be a shirt that said, let me check the spreadsheet, that would be for you, Scott. Like, but hey, I would say we are here because of your spreadsheets.
Say it again for the people that didn't
we
hear that.
We are here because of your spreadsheet genius. There you go. I said it. But it's like, what, if it's not decisions, you just have to ask, what am I avoiding by being busy? And I know for me, it was just me personally, it was my poor self-esteem.
Yeah. And sometimes that busyness can cloud that for a very, very long time.
Oh, yeah. Right? Because here's the thing is my busy got me applause.
Yeah.
My busy got me likes and comments and brought money in and built a business. Like, I could be busy. I could be productive. I was all of those things, but I was also very busy numbing, running, hiding, all of those things.
Kind of back to that idea of like on the soul level, you were tired.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Busy out here, but tired in here.
Oh, so tired. So tired.
So in our podcast, this idea of motion versus progress and taking a reflection of your time, looking at your schedule, how you're busying and not being effective. This idea, this end of quote is that effectiveness isn't about doing more. It's about doing what matters. Being effective isn't about doing more. It's about doing what matters.
So maybe what you actually need to do today, if you're listening or watching, maybe the very first thing you need to ask yourself is, what matters to me? Because we can clean up and, you can get effective. You can have to-do lists. You can have like, what are the things that move the needle? But you have to ask yourself, is this meaningful to me? Does this still light me up? The work can be hard, but it still needs to be meaningful to you. Yeah. And if it's not meaningful, then we got to clean that up And then from there, when we understand like, okay, this is the meaningful thing. Now what does it actually look like to be productive with my time in a way that matters? So that's our challenge for you today. Again, we don't want you just coming here, listening and being like, that sounds good. And then come to the next one and be like, all right, what else are they going to tell me? We're about getting you into implementing, taking the action. So take something from today. At the very least, do an inventory of your calendar. Ask yourself, what actually matters to me? And am I moving things in a way that feels meaningful to me?
So good. Hey, if you're watching on YouTube, we'd love for you just to hit that subscribe button, hit the bell, add a comment below. We'd love to continue this conversation in the comments. And if you're not yet, we have a Facebook community called the Pursuit of Happy Well Community on Facebook. It's totally free, where we also can have more conversations about what's happening on this podcast. We are all about helping you live a happy, well life.
We'll see you next week.